David was born in Bethlehem to Jesse, a descendant of Ruth and Boaz. From an early age, he was set apart. Though no one yet knew the great destiny awaiting him, he grew up in a modest household surrounded by his older brothers, who were stronger and more experienced in battle. However, David's heart was different. He spent his childhood tending to his father's sheep, learning patience, bravery, and trust in God. While tending to his sheep, David developed not only skill with a sling, but also a deep connection with God. He spent his days playing the harp and composing songs of praise. He also proved his courage when he fought off wild animals to protect the flock, once killing a lion and a bear with his bare hands. One day, God instructed the prophet Samuel to visit Jesse's house to anoint the next king of Israel. Jesse proudly presented his eldest sons, who were strong and fit for battle, but God rejected them one by one. Finally, Samuel asked if there were any more sons. Reluctantly, Jesse called for David, who was out in the fields tending the sheep. As David entered, God spoke to Samuel, confirming that this was the chosen one. Samuel took a horn of oil and anointed David in front of his family. From that moment on, the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him. Though anointed as king, David returned to his sheep, waiting for God's timing. Little did he know, his journey from shepherd to king was only beginning. Israel was at war with the Philistines, and their champion Goliath, a giant, taunted the Israelites daily. David, visiting the battlefield to bring food to his brothers, heard Goliath's mockery and was filled with righteous anger. With faith in God, David stepped forward to face Goliath, armed only with a sling and 5 smooth stones. As Goliath advanced, David slung a stone that struck the giant on the forehead, killing him instantly. David's faith and courage brought victory to Israel. David's fame spread throughout Israel, and King Saul brought him into the palace. David's skill with the harp soothed Saul's troubled spirit. However, Saul grew jealous of David's successes and sought to kill him. Saul had once been Israel's mighty king, chosen by God, admired by the people, and feared by his enemies. But everything changed when a young shepherd named David stepped onto the battlefield and defeated Goliath with nothing but a sling and a stone. The victory made David a hero overnight, and the people sang his praises, chanting, "Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands." That song stung Saul's heart like a dagger. He had always been the one in the spotlight, the warrior king whom the people cheered for. But now David was the name on everyone's lips. The jealousy began as a flicker, but it grew into a wildfire as Saul watched David succeed in everything he did, favored not only by the people, but more painfully, by God himself. Saul knew he had lost God's favor due to his disobedience, and it tormented him to see that David had what he had lost. Even worse, his own son Jonathan loved David like a brother, and his daughter Michal fell in love with him. Saul's own family was drawn to the man he had begun to see as a threat. No matter how much he tried to push it away, the fear kept creeping back. Was David the one who would take his throne? The thought consumed him, twisting his admiration for David into hatred. And so Saul made up his mind. If David was destined to replace him, he would not let it happen without a fight. David became a fugitive, fleeing from place to place while continuing to trust in God's protection. Despite multiple opportunities, David refused to harm Saul, respecting him as God's anointed. Despite multiple opportunities, David refused to harm Saul, respecting him as God's anointed. After King Saul's death, David was anointed king of Judah and later of all Israel. He united the tribes and established Jerusalem as the capital. David brought the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem with great celebration. Despite his imperfections, including his sin with Bathsheba, David repented sincerely and remained a man after God's own heart. As king, David took multiple wives, including Michal, Abigail, and Bathsheba. He had many children, but his family was plagued with conflict and tragedy. His son Amnon committed a terrible crime against his sister Tamar, which led to his murder by Absalom. This division within David's household brought him great sorrow. One evening, David saw Bathsheba bathing on a rooftop and desired her. He summoned her, and she became pregnant. To cover up the affair, David arranged for her husband Uriah to be sent to the front lines of battle, where he was killed. God sent the prophet Nathan to confront David, and David repented deeply, though he faced severe consequences. David's son Absalom grew resentful and led a rebellion against his father. He declared himself king and forced David to flee Jerusalem. Eventually, Absalom was defeated and killed, leaving David heartbroken. He mourned deeply, crying out, "Oh, my son Absalom! My son Absalom!" Through his trials, David continued to write psalms, pouring his emotions into songs of praise and lament. His writings would later form much of the book of Psalms, offering comfort and inspiration for generations. David reigned as king for 40 years. Before his death, he instructed his son Solomon to follow God's ways. David's legacy as a shepherd, warrior, poet, and king demonstrates God's power to transform humble beginnings into greatness for his glory. Through his lineage came the Messiah, Jesus Christ, fulfilling God's promise.